if she's out.
This program is about unsolved mysteries. Whenever possible, the actual family members and police officials have participated in recreating the events. What you are about to see is not a news broadcast.
On November the 24th, 1971, at 8:12 p.m., 10,000 feet above southwestern Washington state, a man forced open the rear doorway of a commercial airliner. Buffeted by winds gusting in excess of 200 miles per hour, he stood briefly on a rear stairwell. A man, known only as D.B. Cooper, leapt into space in the unknown. The last flight and strange disappearance of D.B. Cooper is one of the most baffling cases of this century. Many, including the FBI, believe he must have perished when he leapt from a 727 at 10,000 feet. Others disagree. They say he made it. Tonight, we will recreate D.B. Cooper's last flight and examine two other cases. In one, an $8 million collection of sports memorabilia has disappeared. Among the treasures was Babe Ruth's uniform. In the other, two teenage boys lay motionless in the path of an onrushing train. Their parents believe they were murdered. Join me. You may be able to help solve a mystery. To some, D.B. Cooper is a skyjacking mastermind behind a daring crime that defied both the elements and the authorities. To most of us, he's nothing more than a common criminal who risked the lives of 42 innocent people for $200,000. But one fact remains. Nobody knows whether D.B. Cooper is dead or alive. Thanksgiving Eve, 1971. At 2 p.m., D.B. Cooper walked into the Portland airport.
He was your typical businessman, a suit, tie, a raincoat, carrying an attaché case. Nothing distinctive about him except perhaps for the fact that everything was very dark. Black tie, black raincoat, black shoes.
Cooper.
He appeared at the ticket counter, bought his ticket, but just gave the name Cooper.
By the way, is that a 727?
Yes, sir, it is. It'll be $20, please.
The 727 became notorious through this case because it is the only airliner from which a successful parachute jump can be made from the passenger cabin.
Flight 305's non-stop service to Seattle is now ready for boarding.
Cooper had purchased a one-way ticket to Seattle. The only luggage he carried was an attaché case.
Thank you, sir. You have a good flight now.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome on board Flight 305, 727 jet service nonstop from Portland to Seattle, Washington.
He was the last person to board the plane and took his seat while the 727 began its taxi to the runway. Florence Schaffner was the first crew member to talk to Cooper.
You'll need to put this under your front seat, please.
He handed me a note, and he kept looking at me. And I just ignored him the first time he looked at me, and then he said, "I want you to read the note." It was printed, "Miss, I have a bomb in my briefcase. I want you to sit beside me."
This is no joke. There's a bomb in here.
I saw a big battery with 6 dynamite sticks wrapped around the battery. And he said to me, all I have to do is attach this wire to this gadget here, and we all be dead.
She saw the bomb, so we know it's for real. Yeah.
Florence went to the cockpit to inform the crew about Cooper and his threat.
Can you handle it?
Yeah. Tina, he's the guy in the very back. He's all dressed in black.
We were very, very scared to death. All of us were. I was thinking about dying. That's all I thought. I was also thinking I'll never see my parents, my brothers and sisters.
Scotty, we call headquarters?
Yes, Bill, go ahead and call headquarters.
The flight crew immediately notified air traffic control about the hijacking.
305, we have a hijack in progress.
They, in turn, contacted the FBI.
Okay, I gave the captain your demands.
Did you tell him $200,000 cash, small bills?
Yes, I told him
4
small
parachutes.
bills.
He wanted $200,000 in cash in a knapsack and 4 parachutes. Identified the parachutes as 2 front pack parachutes and 2 backpacks, and he specified that the airliner remain in the air until the money and the parachutes were ready at Seattle. He also specified that the other passengers not be told that the airplane was being hijacked.
Can I get you something to drink?
The flight crew proceeded as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Drinks were served. Cooper ordered 2 bourbon and waters.
The FBI asked the airline what their approach to the hijacking was going to be. That is, did they wish to pay the ransom? This is an option that the victim of an extortion has rather than law enforcement. And they responded instantly. They wished to pay the ransom. And so the FBI at Seattle set about assisting in obtaining the money.
Each bill was photographed and the serial numbers recorded. Cooper also insisted the plane be immediately refueled upon landing in Seattle. No passengers were to be released until all of his demands were met.
Flight 305, Seattle, Tacoma. Just been informed the money and the chutes have arrived.
The hijacker instructed that they land, but that they stay on the runway rather than to taxi up to the terminal.
Okay, checks.
Check.
Dogs check, gear.
At 5:43 p.m., Flight 305 landed at the Seattle airport. The plane taxied in and parked in a remote area of the field.
The money and the parachutes were brought by an FBI agent to the airplane. They were carried on board by the flight attendant. There were 10,000 $20 bills assembled in straps of 100 bills to a strap and individual straps held together with rubber bands. The money alone, just the currency, weighed 21 pounds.
Four parachutes were delivered, but the authorities and the skyjacker were unaware that one of the parachutes was defective. It would not open under any circumstances.
All right, that's 2. Where's the other 2?
They're right out back.
Get them up here.
Both the flight crew and the FBI were worried that Cooper would use the 4 parachutes to take hostages along with him. But the passengers on board were oblivious to what was going on. Though annoyed at the delay, they remained calm, unaware of the drama surrounding them.
During the time the airliner was on the ground at Seattle, there were FBI agents with scoped rifles who were prepared, if the indications were present, that required it to pick him off.
He was very, very uptight, suspicious. He said to us to pull down the shade. Every shade must be down, so I did and Tina did.
They seem to be having trouble with getting fuel on the aircraft. And we thought, well, maybe they're delaying it. And we said, we don't want any delay. And at this time, the hijacker seemed to be getting real shook up. So we told him on the ground, if you're trying to delay us with any of these kind of tactics, let's get with it and get the fuel on, which they finally did.
We apologize for...
Finally, the passengers were allowed to deplane, but Cooper demanded that the flight crew and one flight attendant stay on board.
The co-pilot said, "You better get the hell out now." So I left without Tina, and that's when he decided to keep her because he was getting suspicious at everything.
The passengers were met by FBI agents. Only then did they realize that their lives had been in mortal danger. When debriefed, they could remember nothing about the man with the attaché case.
All right, listen up, Captain.
Cooper ordered the pilot to fly from Seattle to Mexico City at a height of 10,000 feet and a speed of 200 miles per hour. Under these conditions, the 727 would have to refuel along the way. Cooper agreed to stop and refuel in Reno, Nevada. He then made an unusual request.
And I want the back stairwell down.
Well, we're checking with the company.
The pilot explained that he wasn't able to take off with that door open, and they argued back and forth, and finally the pilot said he just couldn't fly the airplane and wasn't going to try, and the hijacker consented for the door to be closed for takeoff, which it was.
At 7:37 p.m., Flight 305 took off. The Seattle Control Tower alerted all other aircraft in the area to remain clear, so the 727 had the sky to itself. The weather had deteriorated, with a storm front directly in the plane's flight path.
I want you to get up there with your flyboard.
He told her to go back into the cockpit and to close the curtain between the coach and the first-class cabins. And as she turned around to close the curtains, she said she saw him tying something to his waist with what she thought was rope. Later, in the cockpit, the light flashed indicating that the hijacker was attempting to operate the door. At 8:12, the pilot told us that they were experiencing a rapid change in the air pressure reflected in a ears-popping experience.
Somewhere over the forests of southern Washington state, Cooper jumped. He has never been seen since. Since D.B. Cooper's hijacking, all 727s have been modified so that the rear door cannot be opened during a flight. When we return, we'll reveal an important new clue to the identity of D.B. Cooper. No one can be certain if D.B. Cooper survived his jump from 10,000 feet. On the aircraft, he left no identifiable fingerprints, no personal items, no clue to his identity. D.B. Cooper seems to have vanished from the face of the earth. Upon landing in Reno, Nevada, every inch of the 727 was scrutinized for clues as to D.B. Cooper's real identity. The flight attendants who had seen Cooper up close created a composite drawing of his face. Flight 305 flew along this path on its way to Reno. The crew felt that Cooper had jumped somewhere near the southern tip of Washington state. For that reason, it was believed that Cooper would be found in this area, bordered by Lake Merwin to the north and ending 20 miles north of Portland, Oregon. No matter where Cooper landed, Frank Heil believes he could have survived.
Let's say he went down in the water. You've got to know how to manage that parachute. You can use it for some flotation. Now, his life expectancy is not going to be very long in that water. It's cold. You have to think of the time of the year it was in. So he had probably a very, very few minutes to get on shore. But I think he could have done this.
A large white object had been reported floating in Lake Merwin. Divers repeatedly explored its depths, but found nothing.
My feeling is he would have been hurt regardless of what he landed into. I think that Cooper most likely crawled to a creek. He didn't have any water supplies, didn't bring any along with him, and he would have had to have water to survive. So I assume he made his way to a little creek and perished there.
Some feel that Cooper could not have survived in that rugged terrain, dressed only in a business suit.
We don't know what he wore under the suit. Could have had a pair of long underwear on, which he certainly should have had. And what he had in his pockets may have been the most important thing, because this would have given him the tools of survival. As long as a man's got a knife, a cigarette lighter, and the clothes on his back, he could have lived indefinitely out there. Could do it. It's possible. I think he buried the chute. I think he probably buried the briefcase. He got rid of that. I think he probably put the money in his coat, and I think he headed for a big city someplace and lost himself.
The search for D.B. Cooper continued, but no new clues were discovered. 7 years passed. Then in November of 1978, a hunter deep in the Washington forest discovered a plastic placard from a 727. It had been ripped from the lower stairwell of Flight 305. 15 months later, an even more dramatic discovery was made.
Run up there and just clear a spot off for a fire.
On February 10th, 1980, a family was preparing a barbecue on the shore of the Columbia River, 165 miles south of Seattle and 20 miles southwest of Cooper's supposed jump point. They planned on digging a fire pit, but dug up something else. The bills, totaling $5,880, were waterlogged and deteriorated.
There were 294 bills found, and all of those serial numbers are on the ransom list, so that money is definitely, positively identified as having come from that particular ransom money.
Money was found. If they'd have found $200,000, I'd have said, hey, it's all over. He's out there, he's dead. Now we've got some real proof. But they did not find $200,000. Where's the rest of the money? That's what I want to know.
He risked his life to hijack the airliner. He didn't get to spend the money. He may have lost his life. Now, I don't know that he lost his life, but I think there's a very good chance that he did. None of the money, not one bill, has ever turned up in circulation.
Could D.B. Cooper have struck again? Only 5 months after Cooper's flight, in April of 1972, $500,000 was extorted from another airline by another skyjacker. The crime was remarkably similar to the Cooper skyjacking. His name was Richard McCoy, a former Green Beret skydiver. He was sentenced to 45 years for air piracy, but escaped and was tracked down and killed in a gun battle with the FBI. Due to the resemblance between their pictures, some believe that D.B. Cooper and Richard McCoy are the same man. Florence Schaffner, however, believes the composite of Cooper may be inaccurate.
The composite never really looked like him. The hair does not look like him. The face does not look like him.
Okay. I've added a little bit of eyelid up here.
At the request of Unsolved Mysteries, Florence worked with Malin Coleman, a forensic artist from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Together they created a new portrait of D.B. Cooper.
Wide forehead. It's still strong in my mind. Okay, narrow face. I remember everything. The color of his eyes, the color of his eyebrows, chin, and his features.
What do you think of that?
Yeah. That's it.
Last May, we examined the case of Diane Broadbeck, a Pennsylvania housewife and mother of 2, whose charity work led her to exchange letters of friendship with convicted killer John Yount. Yount, a former high school math teacher, was sentenced to life in prison in 1966 for the brutal murder of a teenage girl. Broadbeck and Yount's friendship gradually grew into a romance. On April 5th, 1986, John Yount escaped from prison, and on the same day, Diane Broadbeck disappeared.
I know my daughter. She would not deliberately help a convicted murderer escape from prison.
Yes, I think that my wife probably did help John Yount get out of jail under pressure. For what reason, I don't know.
Update. John Yount and Diane Broadbeck have been captured. 2 of our viewers in Boise, Idaho, recognized Broadbeck as a former co-worker, Kathy Kerman.
When they showed the picture, it was Kathy's face, obviously. And once they said she was a bank manager and it was from Massachusetts, and they said that John's background was in computers, it was a dead giveaway.
The Humphreys called the FBI, and after a month-long investigation, the fugitive couple was arrested at their home. In the pre-dawn hours of August 23, 1987, a 75-car, 6,000-ton cargo train made its regular night run to Little Rock, Arkansas. The train was over a mile long and was traveling at a speed of 52 miles per hour. So far, the run had been clear sailing as engineer Stephen Schroyer approached the small town of Bryant, Arkansas.
Dump it on the rail up there, you see that?
Suddenly, Schroyer saw something in his path. He couldn't tell what it was. As his train drew closer, he made the horrifying discovery that two boys were lying motionless across the railroad tracks.
From the time that we had placed the train into an emergency position and laid down on the horn, I would estimate about 3 to 5 seconds to impact. And that may not sound like a very long period of time, but when you're bearing down on a couple of children, it's an eternity, honestly.
Despite the engineer's frantic emergency stop, the weight of the heavy cargo train carried it for a full half-mile. The boys' bodies were terribly mangled. The two boys were identified as 16-year-old Don Henry and 17-year-old Kevin Ives, best friends and popular seniors at the Bryant, Arkansas High School. It is extraordinary that Kevin and Don lay on the tracks without moving a muscle, while a huge freight train was hurtling towards them, blaring its emergency horn. The state medical examiner said the boys had been under the influence of marijuana, and he ruled the deaths accidental. Don and Kevin's parents could not accept that ruling. They began a crusade to find out what really happened and to salvage the reputation of their sons.
Well, I couldn't believe that Kevin was knocked out on marijuana or into any kind of heavy drugs, anything like that, because I was home a lot during the day when Kevin come in from school, and Linda was here at nights, and we'd never seen him in a state that he even act like he was, spaced out or however you want to phrase it. I just couldn't see any signs that he was into any kind of heavy drugs or any kind of really drugs at all.
Kevin and Don were both typical teenage boys. They loved to work on their cars. They loved to hunt. Don was a natural comedian, and Kevin was his best audience. Saturday, August 22nd, 1987, Kevin and Don met a group of friends on the outskirts of Little Rock at a favorite gathering place for the local teenagers. The two boys left around midnight to go back to Don's house. Kevin waited on the porch while Don went inside to talk to his father.
And he came in approximately 12:15. Came to the bedroom and told me where he was going and everything, I told him just be careful, and he took one of my spotlights with him, took his 22, and we talked for approximately 15 minutes before he left.
You ready? Where do you want to go?
The two boys set off to go spotlighting, a form of night hunting which is illegal in Arkansas. One of them would shine a light in the animal's eyes, transfixing the prey while the other fired. Spotlighting was a fairly widespread activity among the local boys. So far, Kevin and Don had avoided being caught. That night, the boys chose their usual hunting ground, along the railroad tracks that ran behind Don's house.
I never was even concerned, worried about him when he was in the woods, hunting. Because I never realized you could get in trouble hunting.
It was almost 1 o'clock in the morning.
We were about 6 poles away from it, my big hole. I immediately recognized what we saw. It looked like a body morgue. They were just laid out.
The boys were lying exactly parallel on the tracks, their arms straight down by their sides. They were partially covered by a light green tarp. Lying parallel to both of them was Don's .22 rifle. Neither boy was moving.
And I started laying down on the diesel horn. And I got no reaction, none at all. Not so much as a flinch. And we just passed over.
What had caused the two boys to lie side by side on the railroad tracks? The state medical examiner concluded they had smoked the equivalent of 20 marijuana cigarettes. He determined that Kevin and Don had been in a deep sleep induced by the drug and had never heard the oncoming train. He ruled their death an accident. Don and Kevin's parents would not accept the medical examiner's conclusion.
If they were that stoned, how did they lay down in identical positions? That was my immediate reaction to his ruling.
We checked the train, and it was 98 decibels, which is equal to a jackhammer and air compressor running. I don't think that no one can sleep through that kind of noise. And another thing, too, my son's gun, it was laying on gravel. I know my son too well. He would not lay it on gravel. He wouldn't take a chance on the wood getting scratched.
We hired a private investigator to trying to find out what happened. Every time he would try to find out something, it seemed like he would meet resistance from different authorities and everything, and we weren't getting anywhere.
5 months after their sons were killed, Don and Kevin's parents held a press conference. They hoped to force the authorities to reopen the investigation.
Would you like to give up your son and everybody think they was smoked up and laid down, passed out? No, I don't think anyone wants to give up their kid unless that is honestly proved to be the truth. Then you have to accept it. At this point, it has not been proved to us.
The day after their press conference, the investigation was officially reopened. Newly appointed prosecutor Richard Garrett had the boys' bodies exhumed for a second autopsy to be performed by a noted expert. This doctor concluded that together, the boys had smoked not 20, but between 1 and 3 marijuana cigarettes. He also found evidence to indicate that one boy was already dead and one unconscious when the train hit them. In July of 1988, a grand jury reversed the medical examiner's original finding of accidental death and officially ruled the boys' deaths probable homicides. Prosecutor Garrett then focused on the green tarp. Neither boy owned such a tarp. Who had covered them with it, and why?
All 4 of the people on the train who were able to observe the scene prior to the accident stated that the boys were partially covered by a green tarp.
See what you can find. I'll go ahead and call it in.
Police who searched the scene later denied that engineer Schroyer had even told them about the tarp.
They even questioned its existence. That, to me, would be like questioning the existence of the boys on the track.
Yeah, they were covered up with a tarp. Okay,
because what's real is real and what's not is not. And that's, it was there as well as the boys.
I can understand 2 people laying down on a railroad track. I can understand 2 people laying down and cover themselves up with a tarp. Where would the tarp come from? I am convinced that the tarp existed. The tarp, however, was never found.
The ensuing investigation unearthed an intriguing lead. 1 week before the boys were killed, a man wearing military fatigues had been spotted in the vicinity. His behavior had aroused suspicion, and when police officer Danny Allen stopped to question him, the man opened fire.
I got up from the seat, the subject was gone. And 5 minutes later, Saline County showed up and we searched the area and never found the subject.
On the night Kevin and Don died, witnesses again reported seeing a man in military fatigues. This time he was leaving town, heading down a road less than 200 yards from the spot where the boys' bodies were run over. police have been unable to locate him. 6 weeks after the investigation was reopened, Richard Garrett came up with a strangely similar case. In Hudgon, Oklahoma, just 200 miles west of Little Rock, two young men lying together on the railroad tracks had been run over by a locomotive in 1984. They were lying motionless on the tracks in a position nearly identical to Kevin and Don's.
I think that someone took these boys' lives. They incapacitated one of the boys and then felt like they had to do something to the other one. And then to cover their tracks, laid the boys on the railroad track and covered them up with a tarp. The reason why they did that, I'm not sure. What I'm hunting for is the reason why they did it. I've never carried a gun in my life, but since we've started working on this thing, I am carrying a gun. Because I do feel like that my life could be in danger at some point in time.
Whatever it takes, however long it takes. As long as there is anything to investigate, as long as there is anything to work on, we'll do it.
Hundreds of times I've been out there day and night just trying to get it in my mind of what could have happened or what did happen. I've been out there at night to see how far you can see the train, how far you can hear the train, how loud is the train. I basically think that they walked up on something that they was not supposed to see. They was at the wrong place at the wrong time. I know in my own mind that they was murdered and put there.
Since we filmed this story, Don Henry's T-shirt has been analyzed by an expert pathologist. Tears in the fabric indicate that Don had been stabbed before he was run over by the train. In light of this new evidence, the grand jury changed its ruling from probable homicide to definite homicide. Next, a curious footnote to the legend of Babe Ruth. His uniform, long displayed as a priceless sports treasure, has been stolen, along with other sports memorabilia worth $8 million. In 1927, legendary Babe Ruth hit 60 home runs, a record that stood for over 30 years. Today, his 1927 World Series ring is valued at $50,000. It has disappeared. In 1956, Mickey Mantle had the most home runs and the best batting average of any player in the game. Today, Mantle's 1956 World Series uniform is valued at $15,000. It has disappeared. Pete Rose, a hometown boy from Cincinnati, has more hits than any player in the history of the game. Rose's silver bat is worth $30,000. It, too, has disappeared. At conventions across the country, millions of avid collectors have made baseball memorabilia a multi-million-dollar business. One of the most ardent of these collectors was Dennis Walker. He amassed a trove of sports memorabilia valued at nearly $10 million. Today, this irreplaceable collection is missing. Among the items in Dennis Walker's collection were Babe Ruth's ring, Mickey Mantle's uniform, Pete Rose's silver bat, and hundreds of priceless sports treasures. Number 3, the classic New York Yankees pinstripe. Sadly, this uniform is only a prop. Babe Ruth's real uniform, along with most of Walker's collection, is missing. America's national pastime has been robbed of a major portion of its history, and someone watching tonight may be able to help find it. In June of 1980, Dennis Walker quit his job teaching political science at a small Oregon college and set up an investment company in his hometown of Medford, Oregon. he concocted grandiose investment schemes and opened his own bank on the South Pacific island of Tonga. Walker offered an amazing 25% rate of interest, and indeed paid off early investors on schedule. More than 140 people gave Walker better than $7 million to invest.
He had the Midas touch. And word spread, because if somebody says, give me $10,000, and I will give you $12,500 right now, that sounds like one whale of an investment. The only thing is that he didn't actually give him $12,500. He gave them a piece of paper saying that he owed them $12,500 1 year from now.
Dennis, I have a few things I'd like you to sign.
Dennis Walker's employees also invested with him.
He seemed to be an astute business person, seemed to be very intelligent, and seemed to be very fair.
Topics that we cover there.
I was an investor, and I had a considerable amount of money with Dennis. We all trusted Dennis. I believe that every one of the employees had money invested with Dennis.
Walker had always been an avid baseball fan.
How you doing, Scott?
With his newly accumulated investors' money, he bought rare and expensive sports memorabilia.
Well, I just came in to see if you had anything new to show me today.
Oh, yeah. I got some new Mickey Mouse cards in today.
It was as if he were acting out a childhood fantasy.
That's his rookie year, isn't it?
Yeah.
The first thing that Walker did was he spent a great deal of money on sports memorabilia.
$995.
Yeah.
What about that Willie Mays?
Sure have an eye for him.
$225.
Yeah.
They are some nice cards.
Walker had a passion for sports collectibles, and he freely indulged it with the investors' money.
To some degree, I felt that that was somewhat comforting because we had anywhere from $5 to perhaps $22 million worth of collectibles. Obviously, that's a rather large amount of assets, so the investors weren't too concerned.
Walker soon graduated from $1,000 baseball cards to the really major collectibles. He built one of the most prized collections in the country.
Major League batting champion, 1981. 370 average.
They're an absolute steal if I'd said to you this whole package at $12,000.
$12,000.
That's right.
Walker leased an empty bank building in Medford, Oregon, and opened his very own Sports Hall of Fame. Pete Rose was Walker's special guest at the grand opening of his Hall of Fame. Walker had bought several pieces of memorabilia from Rose personally. He displayed them elaborately among his vast collection, which spanned 9 decades of sports history. Some of the most prized items were a pristine, uncut sheet of baseball cards from the year 1933, worth $10,000. 2 Honus Wagner baseball cards from the year 1910, valued at an incredible $70,000. The diamond-studded ring awarded to Pete Rose in 1984, the year he achieved 4,000 hits, valued at $30,000. And finally, a New York Yankees uniform worn by the great Babe Ruth.
Open up the door for us now.
In 1986, the Medford police obtained a warrant and searched Walker's office. The state of Oregon had been watching him for a year and had filed suit, charging him with fraud and racketeering. The search yielded enough evidence to prosecute Walker for the illegal sale of unregistered securities.
Here's some monetary amounts.
Once we had done that, then we ran into a brick wall as far as cooperation from the people who had invested their money.
The investigation was not a case where an investor did not get money or had complained to the state of Oregon. Everybody at that point was getting their principal interest, whatever it was that they required, to my knowledge.
Walker immediately filed a countersuit against the state, claiming his innocence. He received a number of summons, but continually failed to appear in court. Anticipating the state of Oregon would confiscate his assets, Walker asked Sandy Sanders, an employee, to pack up his prized sports collection.
Actually, I was all for
getting it out of there so that it could be turned into liquid assets and be given back to the investors, and to keep the state from getting their cotton-picking hands on it.
Well, this is the last of it.
In April 1986, Walker decided to leave Oregon and took his entire collection of sports memorabilia with him. Most of Walker's collection would never be seen again.
Yeah, he's in here.
16 months later, a man registered under the name of Charles Lee was found dead in a Las Vegas motel. There was no apparent cause of death and no signs of identification except a prescription bottle bearing the name Dennis Walker.
From reviewing the autopsy photographs and the autopsy records and looking at the dental charts and records, there's no doubt in my mind that was Dennis Walker. There are a number of theories as to why he died, but no one has ever really been able to determine what caused his death. That, combined with the missing sports memorabilia, leaves many, many more questions open than closed in this case.
For every mystery, there is someone, somewhere, who knows the truth. Perhaps that someone is watching. Perhaps it's you.
This program is about unsolved mysteries. Whenever possible, the actual family members and police officials have participated in recreating the events. What you are about to see is not a news broadcast.
Summer 1977. The city of New York. A year-long nightmare was coming to an end. On August 10th, a man named David Berkowitz was arrested. Police believed that he was a lone gunman behind the Son of Sam killings, a brutal series of shootings that had left 6 people dead and 7 seriously injured. The media rejoiced. The elusive Son of Sam was behind bars. Or was he?
The general perception among the public for years had been that David Berkowitz was a lone gunman. The facts and the evidence, not speculation, the facts and the evidence say otherwise.
In 1977, the nation believed the Son of Sam murders were solved. But in the last 11 years, reporter Maury Terry has collected convincing evidence that David Berkowitz did not act alone. Tonight, we examine Terry's theory and present other mysteries. composite sketch of the gunman was created from the survivor's eyewitness description. On October 23rd, in the borough of Queens, another .44 caliber shooting occurred. A man suffered a serious head injury. A month later, again in Queens, two girls stood on a stoop talking. A man appeared out of the shadows. Both survived, but one would be confined to a wheelchair for the rest of her life. Eyewitnesses were able to help police in creating a new composite of the 1977. Two separate shootings took the lives of two women. As in the earlier attacks, a .44 caliber Bulldog revolver was used. Eyewitnesses created two more composites of the killer. They showed a very different face from the earlier drawings. Each appeared to be a different person. On April 17, 1977, another shooting occurred, again in the Pelham Bay section of the Bronx, just 3 blocks from the scene of the first shooting. This time, a hand-printed letter was left at the scene. It read, quote, "I am a monster. I am the son of Sam. I'm a little brat." The city was paralyzed with fear.
The people in the local neighborhoods, particularly in the Bronx, were petrified. I remember people yelling to people in the street, "Get in, that nut's out there." And this is in early afternoon. No one double parked their cars. Business at the local entertainment places, such as bars, restaurants, were nil. No one went out.
On Memorial Day, another sent to columnist J. Breslin, written in the same distinctive style. It contained taunts and references to Satanism. Finally, on July 31st, Son of Sam struck for the last time. Stacy Maury. Her date, Robert Violante, partially blinded.
No, he just walked up to them, shot them, and that.
A 19-year-old mechanic named Tommy Zano was an eyewitness.
That guy came over to the car and blew those people away in less than 4 seconds. Like, you know, you press the trigger and then both would, you know, both could have died. Luckily, Robert's alive, but I'll never forget it.
Zano gave police a description of the shooter. Another composite was created, showing the gunman. Again, there were more differences and similarities when compared to the earlier drawings.
One of them or two looked like David Berkowitz. The others did not resemble him at all. It was completely different. I thought it was rather strange, although we know that these drawings are done by victims or witnesses who see the killer for a brief period of time, and then a day or 2 or 6 hours later they have to go to a police department artist, and he has to put that on paper. That's a very difficult thing to do. So many times these sketches are not very accurate. So I thought perhaps maybe that's why we saw so many different versions of the Son of Sam on the composites.
In their investigation of the Moskowitz shooting, police discovered a parking ticket had been issued near the scene to a Ford Galaxie owned by a postal employee named David Berkowitz.
Just took off right back into the park.
The police traced this ticket to Berkowitz's home. As they approached the building, they saw the car. They spotted a duffel bag with what looked like a rifle butt protruding through the opening.
Got an automatic rifle in here. See if you can get in the car.
When they entered the car, they found a letter threatening another attack. It was signed, Son of Sam.
Hey, John, look at this. We got him. Let's head back to these, get a warrant for this.
The police staked out the Ford Galaxie, waiting for its owner to emerge. At 10 p.m., Berkowitz walked to the car. Inside the brown paper bag he was carrying, there was a .44 caliber revolver. As detectives moved in to arrest him, he sat in his Ford Galaxie, almost passively.
What took you guys so long?
Step out of the car. Turn around.
Berkowitz confessed to all of the shootings. He told the police that he received his orders to commit the crimes from the barking dog of an elderly neighbor named Sam Carr. Berkowitz pleaded guilty to all the charges against him. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in New York's Attica prison. But to Maury Terry, his confession seemed too convenient.
Into the case because I had some suspicions that maybe there was more to it. I was being led to believe, and that's when I started my own investigation into the case. Right, really,
Terry believes that David Berkowitz did not act alone, that he was part of a gang of killers, and it was the killing of Stasi Moskowitz that first aroused his suspicions. Next, we will go through a step-by-step reconstruction of the events leading to the killing of Stasi Moskowitz. Maury Terry believes that this last killing was deliberately planned and executed, not just by David Berkowitz, but by at least 3 people. And he says that there is eyewitness testimony to corroborate this theory.
well, the very early reports that on the Moskowitz killing had me concerned. David Berkowitz's resemblance, his features were widely different from the sketches of the killer that had been done by the police artist. Started seeking out witnesses, found Tommy Zano, who was a key witness to the shooting.
Tommy Zano was with his girlfriend parked on Shore Parkway in front of the car that held Stasi Moskowitz and her boyfriend.
I was looking through the mirror of the car, and I noticed somebody, standing in the park. What I seen is he had long hair, and it's hard to really see the face, but he was thin. He looked like he was in pretty good shape.
That's good.
From looking through the mirror when he was in the park, the guy that came over to the car,
That's nice.
he walked up to the car like as if he was gonna get in the car. And then he went into a stance, shot, and that was it. Turned around and ran. I can't picture Berkowitz running like that. That's the thing that confused me after they caught him. If they seen him, it's either in a week he can't get that fat, that's all I could say. He didn't look like the type of guy to run and do that.
This is a map showing the neighborhood where the last killing occurred. Stasi Moskowitz and her boyfriend were parked here. 2 blocks away on Bay 17th Street, David Berkowitz received the incriminating parking ticket on his Ford Galaxie, parked here. According to Terry, the events leading up to the shooting began here at the Shore Parkway entrance to the park at about 1 a.m. Witnesses saw a yellow Volkswagen arrive at the park entrance. 2 men emerged. This same car was seen fleeing the crime scene after the shootings. 30 minutes later, Tommy Zano noticed the yellow Volkswagen drive past more than once. A half hour later, at 2:05, a policeman issued a parking ticket to Berkowitz's Ford Galaxie. A neighborhood resident named Cecilia Davis pulled up in a friend's car just ahead of Berkowitz's Ford. She then said goodbye to her friend.
We were triple packed, and I was looking in the back, so in case a car comes up, I saw that guy taking the summons off his windshield and keep on looking, watching the cops as they still gave tickets. Then he got in the car, and he came behind us. He couldn't pass because we were blocking the whole street. And he blew the horn at us.
So, I can get out. Oh, I gotta go.
So I got out, and I took a look at him. More or less, I gave him a dirty look. What's the big Russian mill in the night?
Cecilia has identified the man in the car as David Berkowitz. After she left her friend, she saw Berkowitz drive up Bay 17th Street and turn right on Bath, following the police.
The fact that David Berkowitz pulled up behind Mrs. Davis and her date as he did with the police car still on the block or just pulling off the block, blaring his horn. He would not be doing something like that if he's the elusive, ingenious son of Sam carrying that 44 Bulldog in his car. He would try to be as stealthy as possible.
15 minutes after the parking ticket was issued, Stasi Moskowitz and Robert Violante went for a late-night stroll. As they walked in a nearby park, Stasi and Robert saw a man standing next to a restroom, watching them. This restroom was over 2 blocks from Cecilia Davis's apartment. At 2:33 a.m., Mrs. Davis returned to her apartment after walking her dog. She saw David Berkowitz, the man who had honked earlier, walking straight towards her.
I know it was the same guy because I saw him when I got out of the car from my friend. I looked at him because he blew the horn.
Cecilia saw Berkowitz here, over 2 blocks away from where Stasi and Robert were parked. Approximately 1 minute later in her apartment, Cecilia heard the sounds of gunfire in the distance. Those 4 shots killed Stasi Moskowitz and almost blinded Robert Violante. How could Berkowitz have traveled from this spot, where Cecilia last saw him, to this area, where Stasi and Robert were shot in 1 minute, when it takes at least 2.5 minutes to briskly walk the 2 blocks from Bay 17th Street to the park? Just 15 seconds after the shooting, witnesses saw a man wearing a cheap light-colored wig run out of the park, get into a yellow Volkswagen, and speed away up 17th Avenue. In his haste, he ran a red light and narrowly missed colliding with another car. Maury Terry believes that at least 3 people, including David Berkowitz, were involved in the Moskowitz killing. He claims they were members of an organized conspiracy responsible for every single one of the Son of Sam shootings.
David Berkowitz was selected to be the fall guy on the Son of Sam killings. He was not a willing fall guy. He wanted it to be another way, but Berkowitz knew that he had been involved in all of the shootings. He has pulled the trigger definitely 2 times, responsible for 3 murders. He's not an innocent man, and was on the scene of all the others as a lookout, a wheelman, whatever. So Berkowitz was involved, and Berkowitz knew he was guilty. He also was responsible for getting a parking ticket on his car that night, which also made him susceptible to be the guy to be picked out to take the fall. And on top of that, the real killer escaped in the yellow Volkswagen, and that person was deemed more valuable to the conspirators than David Berkowitz was.
No, I didn't think it was David Berkowitz then, and I don't think it's him now. I definitely don't think it's him.
It has crossed my mind, and it's a strong opinion of mine, that David Berkowitz was not the sole killer and was aided by other accomplices.
We received information that other people may have been involved. I had a statement made to me by someone who allegedly spoke to David Berkowitz, wherein David Berkowitz is supposed to have stated that others were involved.
New York prosecutor John Santucci has moved the status of the Son of Sam investigation from inactive to active. Next week, we'll continue Maury Terry's investigation. He has discovered that David Berkowitz and at least 2 friends were members of a satanic cult. These 2 friends were brothers, and their father's name was Sam. Next, the poignant tale of Curly Green. For half a century, he lived a solitary, frugal life in a tiny Omaha apartment. When he died, his friends were amazed that he had amassed a $200,000 fortune. Someone watching tonight may be his heir. Until 10 years ago, Walter Green lived alone in a small apartment near downtown Omaha. His nickname was Curly, and he lived a simple, frugal life.
How you doing?
He was cordial to his neighbors, but kept mostly to himself. On April 24th, 1978, Curly Green had a heart attack. He died while working in his yard. Everyone who knew him was astounded to find that Curly, during his lifetime, had accumulated more than $200,000. He left no will, and his next of kin could not be located. 10 years after his death, Curly Green's fortune remains the largest unclaimed estate in Nebraska history.
When it came out in the papers that he had the amount of money that they said he had, we were shocked. I can't imagine how he amassed that amount.
They found stock certificates, I understand. They found the coin collection. And they found, much to everyone's surprise, that Curly actually owned the apartment building where he was living.
It is extraordinary that a man who lived as simply as Curly Green could have accrued such a large sum of money. It is even more extraordinary that the money remains unclaimed. But this is not just a story of missing heirs and unclaimed fortunes. It is also a love story, a sweet and haunting one that began nearly 8 decades ago. We don't know much about Curly Green's early life. What we can surmise is this. When he was nearly 17, he hopped a train bound for Omaha. Curly jumped off outside the city, near a small farming town called Schuyler. Curly immediately began to pound the pavement, looking for work. Al Raman, a local tavern keeper, saw the young stranger and offered him not only a ride, but a home-cooked meal with his family. Catherine, the younger of the Rominger girls, was then only 9 years old.
I don't know why Dad brought him. We supposed he came from Denver. We were curious when he sat at the table because we'd never seen him before. But he was a nice-looking young man.
Well, I'll bet it's been quite some time since you smelled cooking like this, Curly.
Well, yeah, a little while.
At dinner, Curly was secretive about his family and his birthplace in Montana.
Where's your family, Curly?
Well, I left my mom and my stepdad back in Denver, and that's about all the family I really have.
Curly said he hadn't gotten along with his stepfather, so he had traveled east.
He had a very nice way of evading. See, when Mama asked him, said, didn't you have some cousins or something? He just said, well, I did once. And he changed the subject. And that's the way Curly was. And we respected him for it.
Do you have any brothers or sisters?
Well, none as pretty as your daughters, ma'am.
The moment Curly first saw Jessamine Rominger, Catherine's older sister, he was smitten. He would never feel the same way about anyone else. Al Rominger found Curly a job working at the local garage. The automobile was still a pretty newfangled machine, but Curly had a knack for fixing cars. He earned enough to enable him to move into a boarding house.
He wasn't a spendthrift, and I used to like it when I have to get paychecks, because he'd give me nickels and dimes.
With his new salary, Curly began to court Jessamine. He only had one problem, getting rid of Catherine, the little sister.
Go to the movies.
Well, I was thinking of the park. How about if you go to the movies and me and Jessamine go to the park?
Okay. Okay.
Well, here we are.
He and Jessamine would go wherever they went. They had some friends in Schuyler. But I didn't care where he went. I got the nickel and dime. That's all I cared about. Curly thought quite a bit of Jessamine because he never went with other girls, only Jessamine.
In 1917, Curly left his job as a mechanic to enlist in the Army. He also left his beloved Jessamine. She began training to be a nurse. Curly served on the European front. It was his unenviable duty to drive the dead and wounded to the makeshift Army hospital. The suffering he witnessed scarred Curly. But when the war ended, he returned home full of hope to Schuyler, Nebraska, and to Jessamine.
you again. How have you been?
I'm fine.
Is Jessamine here?
No, Curly. I'm sorry. She's gone to Omaha.
Well, got these flowers. Yeah.
Jessamine liked him, and he was a gentleman always. But she wanted other things out of life, and he didn't appear to be educated. And his earning capacity wasn't great, I suppose. And anyhow, they didn't go together anymore.
Curly followed Jessamine to Omaha and got a job. First as a mechanic at a newspaper, the Omaha Bee, then as a night watchman for the Union Pacific Railroad. Curly refused to give up on Jessamine. But Jessamine Rominger married another man. Curly never fell in love again. He never married or had a family. Curly spent the next 60 years alone. In all those years, he never told anyone who his real family was. Other than Catherine, Curly's best friend was Riley Marr, his barber and a fellow member of the Masonic Lodge.
I really never really got that close to him, actually. I thought I was a pretty good friend of his because he did invite me over to his home on occasion, and we did sit around and have a cup of coffee and talked about things.
Once, Riley noticed some postcards and pictures neatly displayed in Curly's apartment. He was curious to know if they were from Curly's family.
And I picked one of them up, and it had a postmark of Brooklyn, New York, and I asked him something about where that was. It was a long ways from home, and he said, never mind, and he took it and put it away. Well, it made me feel like I was probably intruding on his privacy of some sort, and that he had something that he maybe didn't want revealed, or maybe he'd had a tragedy in his lifetime somewhere along the way that he was trying to avoid talking about.
Over the years, Curly had amassed a considerable fortune, but he kept that a secret, too. Some people attributed Curly's wealth to an extremely valuable coin collection, but Catherine thought he just plain saved every penny he made.
Well, he said he would get up in the morning, and after he'd eat breakfast, he'd put a can on the pilot light. And by the time he'd come back and ready for lunch or the evening meal, it was just right to eat. He was that saving. Maybe that's how he got the money.
When he died, Curly Green had accumulated a fortune of more than $200,000, held primarily in real estate, stocks, and bonds. So far, no legitimate heirs have claimed Curly's estate. In 1986, investigator Josh Butler, who tracks down missing heirs professionally, began researching the case of Curly Green. Josh had heard that Curly once mentioned having a brother who was killed in a shootout.
Indeed, there had been a man named Al Green who was shot and killed shortly after the 4th of July in 1921. We really went to some extremes in this case, but were surprised and a little disappointed never to have found any clear connection with Curly Green. Part of the mystery here is that Al Green's father, I believe to have been a Joseph Green, and I now understand that Curly Green's father was Harry Albert Green. So quite probably Al Green and Curly Green were cousins rather than brothers.
The man named Al Green was killed in 1921. Josh Butler now thinks it is probable that Curly's actual brother was killed several years earlier. The search for Curly's heirs continues.
It's very strange that a man would accumulate $200,000 in his lifetime and that he would have no known relatives that anybody knew about, and not leave some sort of a written document concerning the disposition of this money. Somewhere there's somebody who has enough information in their own family that they're going to be able to come forward and prove their entitlement to this. It'll be a case of going from the people back to the money.
These are 5 of the few known photographs of Curly Green, showing him as a young man, in middle age, and before he died. We know he said he was born in Kendall, Montana, and lived in Denver. We know he had a collection of gold coins, some of which he might have obtained in Mexico. He received postcards from someone in Brooklyn, New York. Curly claimed he had a brother who was killed in a shootout, and he stated on a 1938 birth certificate that Albert Harry Green, born in England, and Anne Moran Green, born in Latvia, were his parents. None of these three relatives has been traced. At Curly's funeral, a mysterious wreath of flowers became the final clue to his past. This card came with the flowers. It's signed Mrs. Joe Greener, Denver, Colorado. Perhaps Mrs. Greener is the key to the puzzling life of Walter Curly Green. Next, the story of a double murder in a tiny Baptist church in rural Georgia. The only clue is a pair of ordinary glasses left behind by the killer. Waverly, Georgia, population 825, is a predominantly black community nestled in the Baptist Bible Belt. Lumber, farming, and the paper mill provide the income for this small, isolated area over 35 miles from the nearest big city, Jacksonville, Florida. For years, Rising Daughters Baptist Church has served not only as a place of worship, but also as a social center for the small township. But on March 11th, 1985, this quiet community was shattered by violence. The quiet sanctity of Rising Daughters Church was violated by the brutal double murder of Harold and Thelma Swain. Harold Swain was a well-respected deacon of the church, a member of the county jury commission, and a spokesperson for the black community. Thelma Swain was also closely involved with church affairs. Harold and Thelma had been married for over 43 years.
Harold was always happy and jolly, laughing. It's something like that might have come natural to Harold because of his love and kindness for everyone. And he would always go out of his way to help someone at any time, day or night, no matter what time. If you needed a favor of any type and he could do it, he was there. Same thing about Thelma.
All the people up here, well, they came to his funeral. Most people I ever saw at a funeral here in my life, just because everybody thought that much of Harold and respected.
On the night they were murdered, Harold and Thelma held their weekly Tuesday night Bible class. 9 women attended.
Lord, do I put my trust? Let me never be put to confusion. Now let us pray. Oh God, I want to thank you for bringing us together tonight. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Now, is there any further business that you care to discuss, Sister Brenda?
Yeah, well, I'd like to remind everybody about...
At 8:50, one of the women excused herself early.
I have to go near to pick my daughter up from work.
Okay.
That would help resolve this situation. May I help you?
Yeah, I want to talk to somebody.
Who?
Somebody in there.
She encountered a stranger in the church vestibule.
I want to talk to him.
I'll be right back.
Some of the other women in the group caught just a glimpse of the man, a young white male.
In April.
Excuse me, sister.
But that's... What's happening? Oh my God.
The women rushed into the pastor's office and tried to call for help. The phone didn't work.
Stay.
20 minutes passed while the women waited in fear. Finally, one of them made a dash for her car and went to summon help. That night, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation was brought in, and a massive manhunt started in this tiny black community.
Harold and Thelma were personal friends of mine and my family's.
And it was kind of a shock to me. I think I was in shock for a while. When I got there, there was a lot of confusion. No one really knew what had happened. They didn't know what the facts were. They didn't know who had done the killing. They didn't know what the motive was.
The Swains, highly respected people, very active in the community, are just not the type of person that, would be the victim of a murder plot. There was a lot of physical evidence at the scene. Bullet casings, 2 pair of glasses. For one, we were able to determine belonged to Harold Swain. The other pair, no one knew who they belonged to. The first gut reaction that I had was a transient, because the glasses appeared to belong to a person who did not have enough money to properly maintain their glasses or to buy glasses when they needed them.
These are the glasses found on that night, and they're not ordinary glasses. The lenses are thick, the surface pocked by a welding torch. The earpieces don't match. Were they dropped by the killer? When the police discovered these glasses, they investigated the theory that the murderer may have been a transient. Rising Daughters Church is located on busy Highway 17. Transients often would stop by for a handout or a free meal. But if robbery was the motive, why were over $300 left in Harold Swain's pocket? Other evidence suggests that the crime was premeditated. The authorities feel that the church had been cased before the brutal attack.
The telephone lines at the church had been cut, which could or could not say that it was a premeditated murder. It could have been a premeditated armed robbery attempt.
The woman who left the church early clearly saw the attacker. Fearing for her life, she did not want to appear on camera.
He was calm. I was thinking that he was there for a handout. He didn't seem to be someone to hurt anybody. I didn't see any weapon or anything. And it seemed like he had on scuffed boots. And he had long blonde hair, shoulder-length hair. But I really wasn't looking at him that hard, because I wanted to leave.
Hi, can I help you with something?
The police attempted to create a picture of the killer using an identikit, but the eyewitnesses did not agree on many of the details. An artist was brought in to sketch a composite drawing. For 5 months, the police searched for the killer using the composite drawing, but no new leads or clues surfaced. Finally, on July 5th, 1985, police 135 miles away in Telfair County, Georgia, pulled over a car for a minor traffic violation. In the trunk, they found an automatic weapon and a submachine gun. 3 suspects were taken into custody. One of them was Donnie Barrington.
We were given some information by some acquaintance of these people that Donnie Barrington had told people in Florida that he had murdered a black preacher and his wife in a church. After several interviews with Donnie, he admitted that he had told these people in Florida that he killed a black preacher and his wife. And then he just smiled and said, but I was lying to him. We have never been able to come up with any hard evidence to connect Donnie with this case.
Donnie Barrington was then given a polygraph test, and he flunked it. As a matter of fact, the polygraph operator told us that Mr. Barrington was a very good suspect in the murder.
The resemblance between the man on the wanted poster and Donnie Barrington was inconclusive. So the eyewitnesses from the church in Waverly were taken to Jacksonville for a police lineup.
People cannot see you.
You'll be viewing 5 individuals. I'd like, if you will, to place yourself in your mind back at the church the night that this incident happened. Okay?
Yes, sir.
5 individuals on the other side won't be able to see or hear you. Lights?
Lights?
There was about 6 men there. And I really couldn't say that one of them was him, you know, because the person I saw had short hair. His complexion was a little bit lighter, but he had the same boots that I saw that night. The boots was what I recognized, but I wasn't really sure.
The murder charges against Donnie Barrington were not pursued, but he was subsequently convicted on weapons charges and is currently serving 5 years in a federal penitentiary. 1 year later, the Swain investigation took a new direction. Agent Joe Gregory came across a face in a state crime bulletin which exactly matched the identikit picture created by one of the witnesses at the church.
It gave me a chill. It literally gave me a chill when I saw the composite, because there are so many, hundreds of thousands of combinations to make a composite. And what are the odds that 2 of them being exact, and these composites were exact matches?
The Kansas suspect was wanted for armed robbery in a church, but was never taken into custody. The Kansas Bureau of Investigation could not even give Agent Gregory the suspect's name.
And we found that they had never developed any leads. They don't know who he is, other than the fact that he drove an older car with a Florida tag on it.
3 years later, the brutal murders of Harold and Thelma Swain remain a mystery. Were they just random killings committed by a violent transient, or were they a planned and premeditated murder? And if so, why?
They say your first hunch is usually your best. Everything that night pointed to a transient attempting to pull a robbery.
My feelings are in that the individual did not get any money. He went around and checked to find out if there was a phone, and then cut those lines and singled out one individual from the church and brought him out to the vestibule, shot him, and then, in my opinion, intended that he be dead. He shot him the last round in the temple. There's no question that his intent was to kill Harold Swain.
Personally, a case like this haunts you. It's the type of case that you never forget. I drive by Rising Daughters every day coming into this county, and I never drive by that I don't look and think about the Swains.
Last February on Unsolved Mysteries, we examined the case of Elmer DeBoer, an oil company courier who was murdered, execution style, on May 11th, 1987. The 2 key suspects in the case were Jerry Strickland and his 16-year-old girlfriend, Missy Mundy. Local police believe the couple kidnapped Elmer, robbed him of $10,000, then took him to a deserted wooded area outside of Pontiac, Michigan, and murdered him. Jerry and Missy were never seen again. Update: Moses Lake, Washington. Within minutes of our broadcast, 20 viewers in this small rural community called the police to say they recognized Jerry Strickland and Missy Mundy. 7 hours later, the police arrested the fugitive couple at a friend's house. They discovered that Jerry and Missy had themselves watched the broadcast and were waiting for the police.
All he said is, "I'm the guy you're looking for." And he was just real calm and collect. No violence at all.
I figured the time was about 7 hours and 15 minutes from the time the Unsolved Mysteries aired and he was in custody. I just felt super about it.
On February 12th, Jerry and Missy were extradited back to Michigan to stand trial for armed robbery, kidnapping, and murder. Jerry insists they are innocent.
They got circumstantial evidence, all hearsay. It's people talking, but no witnesses. I mean, okay? That's why, I say they're going to learn that we didn't do this.
We have enough evidence, circumstantial evidence and physical evidence, that we feel he's guilty.
All they want is a conviction, and they don't care if they burn me or not.
Thanks to our viewers, Jerry Strickland and Missy Mundy will have their day in court. They're being tried separately, and if convicted, could face life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Next week, we'll continue our examination of the Son of Sam shootings. Reporter Maury Terry claims that the attacks were engineered by a satanic cult, a cult he believes is still alive and has not yet been brought to justice. Join us next week for another edition of Unsolved Mysteries.
This program is about unsolved mysteries. Whenever possible, the actual family members and police officials have participated in recreating the events. What you are about to see is not a news broadcast.
Tonight on Unsolved Mysteries, we continue our examination into New York's infamous Son of Sam shootings. New evidence suggests that the Son of Sam killer, David Berkowitz, was part of a satanic cult that murdered 6 people. At an inn near Philadelphia, the head waitress sees a Revolutionary War soldier on the main staircase. In Jackson, Mississippi, a wealthy woman is kidnapped. Her millionaire husband gives in to the kidnapper's demands. Annie Herron is still missing. These intriguing stories all need one final clue, one final piece of information before they can be solved. Perhaps someone watching tonight can help. Perhaps it's you. For over 100 years, people have seen and heard things around the General Wayne Inn in Philadelphia that they cannot explain. A number of different ghosts who seem to have an unusual agenda of mischief in mind. Located in Marion, Pennsylvania, The General Wayne Inn opened in 1704 and is reputed to be the oldest continuously functioning inn in America. Ben Franklin visited the inn, and George Washington slept in what is today this dining room. Edgar Allan Poe wrote part of his famous poem, The Raven, here in 1836. But it is a history of hauntings that brings us to the General Wayne Inn. Barton Johnson is the innkeeper and serves as vice president of the local historical society.
We have had towels thrown all over the kitchen. We have had adding machine problems. We've had television problems directly attributable to something that was not understandable. We have had reports of sightings of entities, ghosts. We have had a funny incident with a new Cadillac in the parking lot outside.
Last year, a valet walked by a Cadillac parked in front of the inn. The owner had gone inside and had taken his keys with him.
Doors were locked, windows were all closed. The kid was scared to death. And I said, look, calm down. These things happen around here, and just relax. I enjoy these ghosts. I mean, they don't bother me at all. I think they come up with some real clever little things.
For God's sake, what are you doing?
What the hell are you doing?
Like on a busy night, that's when this entity will start. And he'll go down the entire side of the bar, blowing on the back of the girls' necks. And the poor guys, they really were doing nothing. Now, I knew when the first one started that it would continue all the way down to the end of the bar. It always did.
Did you do that?
Do what?
Blow in the back of my neck.
It happened so often that I enjoyed standing back on the other side of the bar and watching. Hundreds of occurrences have happened. Some very minor, some more dramatic, but there have been hundreds of them.
Bart has witnessed many ghostly events, but has never actually seen a ghost. Dave Rogers has.
I was maitre d' at the time, and we were closing the restaurant up for the night. And I was starting on my way out, and I looked up. I only saw it for a split second. It was just a head sitting on this chest of drawers. It didn't register with me right away, and when I got out into the bar area, it was like I hit a brick wall, and it just stopped dead in my tracks, and I started saying, I saw a head, I saw something, I saw a head. It was just like it happened yesterday. I'll never forget the details, although I just saw it for an instant.
Other employees have also seen apparitions. Gormley was walking through the dining room.
And I heard someone call my name, Alice, Alice. So I walked out of here to see if it was the manager, and I saw this apparition, this person on the stairs. And he was standing on this step, and he looked so startled. And when I said, "Can I help you?" he just disappeared.
Local historian J. Robert Menti has studied the inn's history in detail, and according to him, this specter has been seen before, over 100 years ago.
The first written record of a ghost in the General Wayne Inn that we came across in writing was the report of an election in 1848 that took place in here. A lady went down to the basement to get some more ballots. When she came up, she said to the lady in charge of the elections, "I just saw a soldier down there in a green uniform."
In recent times, there have been 3 new sightings of this soldier. Menti interviewed 3 witnesses who saw the same apparition at different times. Each of them saw the ghost in this basement.
It's an interesting place. I know there's a wine cellar here. And it was right by the door of the wine cellar that each one of them saw the apparition. This is it. This is where they found him. And he stood right there. and the black mustache of a Hessian soldier of the regiments that were occupying Philadelphia at that time.
Hessians were German mercenaries who...
What about the British barracks?
I got...
The
to an experiment situation into a haunting reported.
has asked psychic Paula Rogers to walk through the building. Basement, she made a surprising discovery.
I got an extremely strong impression. A young, I can still see it. And he's in a very old costume. We're probably talking at least 200 years. I could see it was a memory. Him crouched there, petrifying. He seemed to have been left behind.
Paula sensed the soldier only several feet from the spot where witnesses had reported seeing the Hessian. Coincidence or something more?
You never know what they're going to do, and you never know how long they're going to do it.
At the general weigh-in, the ghosts check in, but they don't check out.
One night, during a local newscast Halloween story on the Inn, a number of regular patrons gathered in the bar to watch.
As soon as he showed the first scene of the inside of this building, the whole, no flop over now, no snow, perfect picture, the whole picture started to go very, very slowly, clockwise, all the way around. And all the 50 people in the bar were looking at this and wondering what was going on, and their all heads are all turning, and the whole thing just kept going around until our portion was over. But it never did that before, and it never did it afterwards, and no one else in the whole neighborhood had it that way.
Are there ghosts at the inn? Michaeline Mayer believes that something unexplained is going on, but as is so often the case, cannot prove for certain that it is caused by ghosts.
We did get some interesting results. I can only call them tentative at this point, but our measures, experimental measures, our measures with random number generators, and some of our photography measures have given us enough of a hint that something is actually going on at the General Wayne Inn that deserves a great deal of further exploration.
I know I saw something. I don't think it was a figment of my imagination. I don't think it was a mirage or whatever you want to call it. I saw something.
I don't believe in ghosts, but I know they're here. They have no other place to go, and they might as well have a little fun, and that's exactly what they're doing. And I don't think they're going anywhere either.
Our next story is about a modern-day Good Samaritan, a woman who dedicated her life to helping others, first as a mother and community volunteer, and later as an advocate for children's rights, and as a court-appointed attorney for criminal defendants who could not otherwise afford legal counsel. 2 years ago, she fell victim to the same type of street criminal she once vigorously defended. After raising 3 children, Gretchen Burford embarked on a new life in 1979 when she enrolled in law school at the age of 41. By 1984, Gretchen had a full-time practice in Palo Alto, California. She specialized in criminal defense and juvenile law, motivated by a lifelong concern for the underprivileged, especially minorities and children.
It appears it's a 489. You're looking at possible time in state prison.
I think justice was really important to my mother, and I think that's part of the reason she was drawn to a career in law.
Do you have any prior convictions?
she wanted to help people who didn't maybe start out with all the benefits that her children had.
Gretchen put her heart and soul into defending the people, and she worked hard with them, not only just with the legal defense, but there were a lot of things that she would be involved in as far as their personal lives.
February 26, 1988 was a normal Friday for Gretchen Burford. Late that afternoon, she left her office and started home for the weekend. The police are unclear on her subsequent movements, but with the help of computer banking logs and eyewitness testimony, they have sketched out a probable scenario. They do believe that what happened next was a random act of violence by an assailant unknown to her. Bank records verify that at 6:37 p.m., Gretchen deposited a check for $449 at a branch bank 4 blocks from her office in Palo Alto. It was the beginning of a nightmare that would last for 30 terrifying minutes.
It's here that we suspect that her assailant may have accosted her for the first time. She may have been the type of person who left her car unlocked, which is what assailants look for when they are stalking their victims. She's near a walk-up teller at night. Obviously, she would be a target for some type of an attack.
Gretchen was naive about how she handled herself, especially outdoors. She was never really aware of what was going on around her. The way she looked at things, I think she looked at people very trustingly.
Shut up! Shut up! I'm not gonna hurt you. I start the car.
Authorities speculate that Gretchen was abducted in the bank parking lot some 5 to 10 minutes after arriving there. The next 20 minutes are a complete mystery.
What'd you do with the money you took out of the machine?
I didn't take any money out. I made a deposit.
How about you take me one of those money machines, okay? You got that?
We can park and we can walk around.
What do you think, I'm stupid?
No.
Can you drive up to, though? Go!
You can do some serious jail time for this.
We can only speculate as to what was going on during that 20 minutes. She was used to this type of person and perhaps was trying to appeal to him as to what the consequences would be. Who knows? We don't know.
At 7:02 p.m., 25 minutes after her first bank transaction, Gretchen attempted to withdraw money from another bank machine 3 miles away. This transaction was aborted when she requested more cash than she was authorized to withdraw.
Come on!
Police assume Gretchen may have been trying to discourage her abductor.
Where's the money?
I don't know.
Do it again!
It's not working!
Do it again!
We had 2 witnesses pull up behind Gretchen's vehicle. The male driver saw a struggle going on inside the car. He saw the driver's door open, and then it appeared that she was pulled back inside. Witnesses have told us that she got out of her car screaming, "He stabbed me, he stabbed me," and help me. And she collapsed immediately. So the wound was definitely a one single stab, and it was fatal.
Police believe that Gretchen Burford deliberately caused the accident in a desperate attempt to escape. Her car came to rest 150 yards from the drive-up teller machine. In the aftermath, 2 witnesses were able to get a clear and detailed look at her killer.
The lady jumped out of the car screaming that she was stabbed. And then he got out of the car, stared me and my friend down. Then he turned around and ran. Within 2 seconds, 3 seconds, he was out of sight. Since the girl hit the ground, she said she was stabbed. We went for her.
What happened? Stabbed.
She was lying on the ground, and I could see a little pool of blood. She was looking up at me. She was saying, I'm dying, I'm going to die. I said, you're just bleeding and you're going to be fine, so just, relax. And I held her hand. She looked up at me, her eyes rolled back and her eyes closed, and it kind of, I guess her life ended right there.
133, can you ascertain a apartment number on my last call? 133.
When I arrived at the scene, Gretchen had already been transported to an emergency room.
We have a female stabbing victim.
Do we have a perimeter set up up
yes,
there?
officers are around. There's some evidence. Let's take a look at over here.
I almost immediately started processing her vehicle for any evidence.
Got some blood here on the
I
steering wheel.
looked inside and saw a Paisley baseball hat in the rear passenger compartment that just seemed out of place.
If we go around, we can get a
We
better
later
look at that.
confirmed that that did not belong to her, and it's unknown how that got in her car, so we assumed that it belonged to our suspect.
The next day, authorities recovered the murder weapon, a butcher knife with an 8-inch blade. It was found in a driveway 1 block from the scene, but provided no additional leads. The investigation next focused on the unusual hat found in Gretchen's car. A check with the manufacturer revealed that only 2 stores in the area stocked this item. Even though all attempts to connect the Paisley hat with the suspect have failed, police are convinced it holds the key to solving the case.
I think it's ironic that my mother would have gone on helping, for years probably. That she'd only just started her law career. That she had so much to give and was giving so much and helping so many people, and that it was, it was just ended by somebody who had no idea who she was or what she was, or no ability to care about her.
Last week, we examined the Son of Sam shootings that took place in New York in 1976 and 1977. Investigative reporter Maury Terry believes that the Son of Sam did not act alone, that he was part of an organized conspiracy that carried out a year-long reign of terror in New York City. The Son of Sam shootings began on July 29, 1976. In 8 separate incidents, 6 people were killed and 7 seriously wounded. All of the shots were fired by a .44 caliber revolver. Police created composites from eyewitness accounts of the shootings. The difference in appearance suggested more than one suspect. But on August 10th, David Berkowitz was arrested and confessed to all of the Son of Sam shootings. Investigative reporter Maury Terry gathered evidence that indicated that more than one man was involved.
The general perception among the public for years had been that David Berkowitz was a lone gunman. The facts and the evidence, not speculation, the facts and the evidence say otherwise.
Terry found major discrepancies in eyewitness accounts of the last shooting that support his theory of more than one gunman. Eyewitness Tommy Zano was parked just in front of the victim's car, and he got a good look at the gun.
No, I didn't think it was David Berkowitz then, and I don't think it's him now. I definitely don't think it's him.
A yellow Volkswagen had been spotted leaving the crime scene. It may have contained one or more accomplices to the shooting. Columnist Jimmy Breslin received a letter from the Son of Sam. In this letter, there were cryptic references to the, quote, 22 disciples of hell, and a wicked King Wicker. John Wheaties, the rapist and suffocator of young girls, was also mentioned. The letter was signed the Son of Sam. Underneath was a satanic symbol. Maury Terry believes that the Breslin letter was sent not by Berkowitz, but rather by a satanic cult that operated in Berkowitz's Yonkers neighborhood. He also believes that Berkowitz was a member of the cult, and that it was this group that planned and executed the Son of Sam attacks.
David Berkowitz lived in a 7th-floor apartment in Yonkers. Down the hill was a street named Wicker. Could this be the King Wicker mentioned in the Breslin letter? Wicker Street was near the home of another character believed to be mentioned in the letter, John Wheaties.
I learned that the John Wheaties rapist and suffocator alias of the killer in the Breslin letter was not really an alias at all, but it was the name of a real person. That person was John Carr, who was the real-life son of Sam Carr. John Carr's nickname was Wheaties, and I learned this within a day of the arrest. And from then on, I became deeper and deeper involved in the case, trying to locate John Carr.
This is the face of John Carr. And these are the composite drawings of the .44 caliber killers. Maury Terry believes that there is a resemblance between these two and John Carr. Terry tracked John Carr to Minot, North Dakota, where he had worked as a mechanic at a local Air Force base. Though he lived in Minot during the mid-70s, Carr frequently commuted to New York during the time of the Son of Sam attacks.
Well, from my experience, John Carr was a mixed-up drug addict. He was hanging around with the group of people that were on the other side of the law all the time. John Carr, many, many months before Berkowitz was ever arrested, had talked about his friend Berkey to his friends out in Minot, North Dakota. John Carr was a friend of, a confidant of, and an associate of David Berkowitz.
On February 17, 1978, 6 months after Berkowitz's arrest, John Carr was found dead in his girlfriend's Minot apartment.
When I first walked in the room, it was a ghastly sight. Obviously, the guy had sat on the edge of the bed, put the gun in his mouth, and pulled the trigger. My first interview with his live-in girlfriend at the time, she told me that he must have just taken his own life. The next day, same person, new interview, whole new story. John Carr had to have been murdered. He was wanted by the police in New York for the Son of Sam killings. He was afraid for his life, and I fully believe that John Carr was murdered.
Through interviews with Carr's friends and the police officials in North Dakota, the picture emerged of John Carr being heavily involved in satanic cult activity, both in Minot, North Dakota, and in Westchester County, New York, where he spent part of his time. It involved blood drinking, urine drinking, the ritualistic sacrifice of animals, specifically German shepherds, all sorts of rather horrible activity that certain satanic cults get into.
The satanic symbol found on the Breslin letter, directly under the signature of Son of Sam, was also found inscribed on Carr's Minot phone book. One of Carr's Minot acquaintances was a man named Phil Falcon. Falcon accidentally walked in on John Carr and a companion performing a satanic ritual.
Phil Falcon told us that he walked into his own house one night in North Dakota and found John Carr and another friend of Carr's, part of the circle, in the act of ritualistically sacrificing an animal right in Falcon's house.
Sorry, we're out of here. What are you guys doing here?
And Phil Falcon also told us that John Carr belonged to a very, very violent satanic cult.
Prison sources who knew Berkowitz told Maury Terry that Berkowitz had been introduced to this cult by John Carr's brother, Michael, in 1975.
These are people that you've known for a long time?
Michael Carr ended up inviting Berkowitz to attend what he called a floating coven party. And Berkowitz came in and attended the party, and symbolically, not literally, but symbolically, the .44 was put into his hand that night. That's how he got into the cult scene.
At 4 a.m. on October 4th, 1979, over 2 years after Berkowitz's arrest, Michael Carr was killed. He was driving at a high rate of speed when he crashed into a light post on New York's West Side Highway. He died just 18 months after his brother.
How many members of this devilish cult?
Conclusive proof that Berkowitz knew both John and Michael Carr came during 2 of his depositions. On October 25th, 1978, when asked point blank whether he knew John Carr, he answered, yes.
Yes.
In another deposition taken on January 19, 1982, Berkowitz was asked if the cars were part of a satanic cult. He also answered, yes. When asked whether the brothers were killed to ensure their silence, Berkowitz again responded, yes. The death of the cars may have been engineered by the, quote, 22 disciples of hell mentioned in the Breslin letter. He also believes this is a satanic group that held the rituals in Untermeyer Park, located just 1 mile from Berkowitz's apartment.
It's right up ahead, right there.
On August 11th, 1977, the day after Berkowitz's arrest, 2 young boys led police to a grave that contained the bodies of 3 German shepherds. 2 of them had been strangled with chains. 1 had been shot in the head. At least 10 other slaughtered dogs had been found in the park area.
We received information that groups of people who attired themselves in black or dark-colored robes with hoods were chanting, carrying on some types of rituals on the aqueduct in the rear of Untermeyer Park. Subsequently, the authorities did find some remains of dogs, and the information that we had was that this group of people were sacrificing animals in a satanic ritual.
I got a call from a young boy in Yonkers, 15-year-old high school sophomore, wanted to know if I knew that there was a satanic cult that was meeting in Untermeyer Park in Yonkers and killing dogs. And so I met him down there, which is just about a mile from Berkowitz's residence, and he took me around to various spots in Untermeyer Park, showed me where the cult was meeting. We saw all the satanic graffiti, very sophisticated graffiti at the time, and took me throughout the park.
Over here on the other side of the wall, I had found 3 dead dogs.
Saw the remains of probably 2 or 3 dead German shepherds right there at that time. And he took me along the aqueduct, literally the gutters of NYC from the Breslin letter, and showed me where they set up an altar.
They had an altar. They placed the altar board right over here, in between the 2 trees. And they had.
So now we had the cult, and we knew where it was meeting, and we could tie it right to the Son of Sam case and the Son of Sam letter. It was a very significant case.
You'd like to see your case resolved or no case whatsoever, but it's when you have these if there is someone out there who was involved in the Berkowitz cases, in the killing of a number of people and the wounding of a number of people, and that person is... Certainly, I would like to have that solved and get that person out of the way.
Cult activity has continued around Untermeyer Park since the Son of Sam killings. While we were filming, 2 local residents told us they had witnessed a satanic ceremony in 1987.
About 1.5 years ago, me and my cousin were watching TV, and we saw a car headlights go by on the aqueduct path. And my cousin took a flashlight, and I took a baseball bat and walked up through my yard onto the aqueduct path. There must have been about 15 to 30 people. And there was one guy, and he must have been like the head chanter or something, because he was chanting the loudest over the other people. We just froze. We didn't know what to do because we'd never encountered something like this before. We both decided just to get out of there. We didn't want to get seen because you don't know what people like that will do.
But I think it would serve the public interest for us to know if, in fact, a cult does exist, if, in fact, they engage in satanic activities, if, in fact, sacrifice is part of that activity, if, in fact, human life is the sacrificial aspect of that activity, and how it's impacting upon life in our respective communities.
The Queens District Attorney would like to question the individuals that match these composites. They would also like to locate the yellow 1971 Volkswagen noticed at the scene of one of the Son of Sam attacks. Its license ends with the letters GUR or GVR. If Maury Terry is correct, the satanic group responsible for the Son of Sam attacks is still alive, still meeting, and still recruiting new members. If this last claim is true, certainly that is the most disturbing thought of all. Next, the story of a Mississippi millionaire desperately searching for his kidnapped wife. The ransom money has been paid, and Annie Laurie Heron is still missing. In this house in Jackson, Mississippi, lives 71-year-old Robert Heron, one of the wealthiest men in the state. His wife, Annie Laurie Heron, is 72. A devoted wife and mother, she's well beloved and extremely active in the social and civic life of Jackson. On July the 26th, Annie Laurie Heron was kidnapped.
Good morning.
12 days later, Robert Heron called a press conference at his home. The kidnapping was linked to one of Heron's businesses, and he wanted to make a personal plea to the kidnapper.
My name is Robert Heron. My wife, Annie Laurie, was taken from our home over 10 days ago. My children and I have done everything humanly possible to obtain her release. Like any businessman, I've made decisions which may appear to others as unfeeling, but those appearances are just not true. Moreover, those business decisions were mine, not my wife's. She had absolutely nothing to do with it. My children and I appeal to whomever has my wife that she may be safely returned to us. Thank you.
I think about Mom all the time, and I'm sure my daddy does too. There's no real way to quantify what this, how enormous a tragedy and ordeal this has been to him and to the rest of the family.
Annie Laurie Heron's kidnapping was unusual. Rather than simply insisting on money for himself, the kidnapper left a note naming 12 people whom he felt were owed money by one of Robert Heron's companies and should be paid back. It is Robert Heron's desperate hope that someone watching tonight will come forward with information that will lead him to the woman he loves, the woman he married 48 years ago. When Robert Heron came home from work on the afternoon of July the 26th, he was alarmed to find that his wife was not in the house.
Well, I'm really starting to get
After checking with friends and family, he called the police to report her missing.
I'll wait right here for you, officer. Thank you.
Then Mr. Heron made an alarming discovery. A note, apparently left by a kidnapper, lay by his front door.
The note said, "Do not call the police." However, Mr. Herring had notified the police prior to the note being discovered.
Responding to Mr. Heron's missing persons report, police arrived at the scene and found that it was now a kidnapping connected in some way to Robert Heron's business dealings.
John, you need to take a look at this. Robert Heron put these people back in the shape they was in before they got mixed up with school pictures.
The demands in the note were very vague and made several demands of Mr. Heron concerning certain individuals listed on the note who were allegedly harmed by a company of which Mr. Heron was president.
Heron had been president of School Pictures, a company that sells franchises to photographers throughout the United States to produce portraits of school children. Between 1981 and 1983, in an effort to collect outstanding debts, School Pictures filed lawsuits against 12 franchise owners in 8 states, including Florida. On the day of Annie Laurie Heron's kidnapping, neighbors had reported seeing vehicles that seemed out of place in the neighborhood.
We had calls from various people that there had been 2 particular vehicles that had been seen in that neighborhood, one of which was a pickup truck, and the other was a white cargo van. The cargo van had a Florida plate on it.
Police discovered that the 12 people on the kidnappers' list were the same 12 sued by School Pictures. They resided in 8 different states, but they were all sued through the Hinds County Court in Jackson, Mississippi. Their names are easily available to the general public in county court records. This means that the kidnapper need not have been one of the 12 people on the note.
It's possible that these 12 people had absolutely nothing to do with this abduction. But however, you can't rule out the fact that maybe somebody, especially that had the knowledge of School Pictures and its operation, could have been involved with it.
No specific ransom demand was contained in the letter. We assumed it was a ransom note, and we wanted to comply. We wanted to do everything we could to get Mother back. School Pictures was requested to look into their files on these 12 people. The transactions were reviewed, and letters were, of course, sent out to these 12 people, trying to determine what damages that they had. What did they want? At that point, we didn't get a response except from several of them saying, we don't want anything.
8 days after his press conference, Robert Herron received a letter. He recognized the handwriting. It belonged to his wife, Annie Laurie.
We had hit a very low ebb prior to August 15th, and that was the day that we received a letter in Mother's handwriting, and it basically pled with Daddy again to comply with the demands and to please save her. This gave us quite an emotional lift because it meant that Mother apparently had survived the initial struggle, but it still was extremely vague as to what we were to do. At that point, Daddy, in order to do something to show our good faith effort to comply with these vague demands, instructed his attorneys to check these rolls and find out how much School Pictures had sued these 12 individuals for.
Robert Herron Sr. sent out checks totaling nearly $1 million to the people on the list. Half of the checks have been returned. More than 4 months have passed since Annie Laurie Herron was abducted from her home, and neither her family nor the authorities has had word from her or the kidnapper since the letter they received on August the 15th.
It's been our sincere desire from the very beginning, from the moment of the kidnapping, that we do everything possible to comply with these demands. We want Mother back. It's not our intention to question the motive of these people at this point. Whatever they want, we want to give it to them so we can get Mother back. That is our very paramount concern.
Update. Last month, Newton Alfred Wynn, a 65-year-old lawyer, was arrested by the FBI in Florida on charges relating to the abduction of Annie Laurie Herron. Wynn was one of the 12 men named in the ransom note left at the Herron home. Also, less than 1 month before the kidnapping, he had allegedly purchased a van which matched the description of the vehicle seen in the Herron neighborhood. A woman told the FBI that Wynn had promised her $500 to travel from Florida to Atlanta, Georgia, and mail a letter for him, just 16 days after Annie Laurie Herron was kidnapped. He handed her a manila envelope. Inside was the letter, wrapped in a gray linen napkin. Wynn instructed her not to look at or touch the letter, but to deposit the letter in a mail slot. She had to ease the napkin off, and she was able to observe the writing on the envelope. Later, she identified a photograph of the envelope Robert Herron had received from his wife as the one she had mailed in Atlanta.
I think about Mom all the time, and I'm sure my daddy does too. There's no real way to quantify what this, how enormous a tragedy and ordeal this has been to him and to the rest of the family.
For every mystery, there is someone, somewhere, who knows the truth. Perhaps that someone is watching. Perhaps it's you.